Hey, Tony Mercury with Autoshop Solutions. I have a very special guest today for the 10mm episode. We got Stan Stokes with Iron Fist Consulting. We just had a fantastic conversation in my office, and I wish we would have recorded it, so we're gonna try to hit as many of the things that we talked about in it. I'm gonna let Stan introduce himself. We're gonna jump right into it. Can you introduce yourself and share?
Well, thanks for having me, Tony.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
So, you know, kind of where we have been for the last 10 years as a consulting group is really trying to first look at how do you operationalize the marketing data. You know, Autoshop Solution has this great platform, right? It measures my clicks, my cost, how much I'm spending, it records my conversations, and then it jumps into the POS system and says, hey, did this phone number show up? And I've got this customer number, and I've got this phone call number, and this in the industry we know this as a lead to customer conversion rate.
Right.
And we were kind of talking about what's been kind of the accepted rate.
Yeah.
What's been about 10%.
Yeah, and we were joking in my office that when we're in the sales process, we always ask, and a shop owner always says 100%.
100%. I'm
right?
converting 100% of my
Yeah.
leads. But your data says that the industry we're hovering right around 10%, and so we kind of started analyzing this, and we started saying, okay, you got these great marketing platforms, right? You got all the integration you need, and you got a call recorded. Okay, well, what's going on in this conversation, right? And so you, as a shop owner, probably listen to these calls and go, okay, we need some help
Sounds
here.
good, feels good.
Yeah,
I see the numbers on the back end.
Yeah. And then you kind of start listening to it a little bit more, and you go, man, we could probably improve that number if we had some good coaching. Right, so we go out and we hire a coach, and they come in and kind of listen to our calls, and we work with our service advisor, and maybe that number moves. But we haven't seen that number move, right? So, okay, well, I've got a system, I've hired a coach, and my expected output was I want to see that number increase. Well, have we seen that number increase?
No.
We've not seen that number. And we've got the greatest marketing platforms out there, right? You guys do it. You optimize that campaign to make sure that the leads you're driving.
We're generating those phone calls.
We're generating those phone calls. And you've even gotten to the point where you can categorize. We know this was a good opportunity. Well, what is a good opportunity? Well, what is an opportunity in automotive repair, right? An opportunity is to book an appointment. Why? I cannot fix your call on the phone.
No.
So we just
although some service advisors try.
Oh, we do, right? Oh, we do. And so Iron Fist Consultants is more, we're not an agency or a marketing company. We're more of an analytics company that's measuring and analyzing this data that's coming from these systems, not on your clicks and your costs and your impressions, but the conversations that are coming out of them. And so we started sampling phone calls, and about 500,000 phone calls later, we were able to kind of start identifying, first of all, let's look at consumer behavior, right? Because I ask people all the time, well, what do you think is going on? Well, they're just a bunch of shoppers, right? We hear that all the time.
All the time.
Oh man, they're just a bunch of shoppers. So I looked up the definition of a shopper. The definition of shopper is someone that never had an intent to purchase something, okay?
Well, and with auto repair, it's so reactive too, right? Like my brakes, personally, right now, they are squeaking, right? So I know I'm gonna have to call and go through that process. It's not, and we're talking about this in my office, I'm not thinking about it 6 months in advance. It's reactive. It's I have a problem right now.
You are in market.
Fix it?
Right, you're in market. So when I hear people say, well, they're just shoppers, the first thing I'd help them do is just, well, let's understand what that means, right? And so statistically, when something's on with their car, it's one of two things. It's either a planned or unplanned expense, right? Planned expense is my oil change light reminder's coming on. So I have time to mentally prepare. I have time to think and see, okay, can I afford this? Well, I'm going to be able to plan this. And then we started looking at unplanned. Well, what's unplanned? My engine light's on. I'm getting a squeaky noise. My car's not stopping. It's not running. That's an unplanned expense. So we started studying the characteristics of the caller, right? Because what we found is that there is only 3 types of phone calls. Not 100, not 1,000, not 1,000. There's only 3 types of callers. And it starts with either how much is, do you fix, or can I make an appointment? Or some story, hey, let me tell you what's kind of going on, which leads to, do you and how much is? And so we started analyzing these calls, and we started looking at, okay, if I understand the caller characteristics that only falls into these 3 groups, well, what is it behind the scene? Because all the caller notes they need to ask, they only know this. How much is and do you fix, and how quickly can you get me in there?
Yeah, we're talking just a lot of consumers, when they are calling, they're just uneducated.
Just uneducated.
They don't
know what they don't know.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So it's in that, like, that fear and anxiety we were talking about, is they're they don't know how much it's going to cost. They don't.
Right.
So that's why they're.
And that's all they know to ask.
Exactly.
Right? And so we categorize them as shoppers because they just called and asked for a price, right? But really, when you kind of peel it back a little bit more, what's really going on an unplanned service event is the first reaction a consumer has is what? Anxiety. Oh my gosh, this is gone. What's the second thing we think about? How much is this going to cost? And then the third thing we think about is what? How long is it going to take? Am I going to be inconvenienced? So the characteristics of callers really kind of summed up in probably 3 or 4 different personalities that are going on with a caller. Well, if I called you up and said, hey, look, my name is Stan. My anxieties are really high right now. I don't know anything about you. I don't trust you because it's the industry
I've never been here before.
I've never been there before. And if you can accommodate my schedule, I'd like to book an appointment with you. And you're going to book that appointment with me because I told you exactly what
then
you need.
Then I get that 100%
Right, then you're going to get 100% conversion.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the consumer doesn't do that, right? Because they don't want to make themselves vulnerable. Well, the other side of the coin is that we're in an industry where I call it conflict, right? Nobody wants to fix their car, just like nobody wants to go to the dentist, right?
Oh, yeah.
Outside of the dentist, we're the second worst thing that nobody wants to do, but we have to do it, right? So statistically, when someone gets into the mode of a car repair need, especially in a unplanned or emergency kind of situation, they will get their car fixed within 72 hours. So immediately we take off the table that this is not a shopper call. I guarantee you, if you call back to people you thought was a shopper 3 days ago, did you get your car fixed? I sure did.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And it wasn't with you.
And it wasn't with you.
Yeah.
So then we kind of started taking a look at, okay, what's going on with coaching on this? What's out there in the industry? And coaching was good. Content was good. All right, well, why is that 10% not changing? Okay, well, kind of started analyzing that a little bit more, and we started saying, okay, well, maybe the person, we need to better understand you as a service advisor, what makes you great, right? And does that greatness fall in line with that role, right? Kind of say fit for role, right? Well, let's go back to the hiring process, right? So, Tony, if you were going to hire me, how do you hire me?
The traditional process, right?
What's that?
Interview, gut feeling. Do I feel like they can do this role? Do I feel like they're going to be successful? Things like that.
Right. So you've got a gut instinct that says Stan's going to be a good fit for me. And then I get into the role. And let's say, how long would it take you to figure out that your gut wasn't right?
Yeah, it depends on the candidate. It could be very quickly, 2 weeks, let's call it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you give them grace and ramp period and 60 to 90 days,
60
right?
90
and
days.
then you're like, this is not the right person for this role.
Right. What do you think that cost of business?
Oh man, it's a big number to unpack.
Big number.
Yeah.
Unpack, right? There's the hard dollars, right?
Yeah,
and then
your
there's
labor costs,
Yeah. What was
the
my labor
onboarding,
cost,
yeah.
right? Let's say that's $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, depending upon where you're at. But then you got the soft dollar hit. And what's the soft dollar hit? The guest experience has been impacted, right? What's the lifetime value of a customer?
Yeah.
It's really big, right? And you start putting these numbers together, a bad hire can be detrimental, right? And so,
And sometimes, that's not even realized until 12 months.
6
where
months,
you're like,
right?
oh,
why is my car kept down?
Yeah, Mr. James hasn't been back in a while, and you call him, and they're like, oh, that service advisor like completely turned me off.
Yeah. And so we kept just looking at this and going, okay, we're not looking at the right thing, because if we were looking at the right thing, that industry average of 10% to 20% conversion rate would be going up. So we go back and we look at the hiring process, and we say, well, maybe we need to be looking at the people versus the tools we're giving them to do the job. Are you capable of doing that? And so we started kind of looking around at different things, not measuring personality, but I want to be able to predict your ability to be successful, right? Because your expectation as an owner is performance, right? So it's either big performance or little performance, but that's what your expectation is. You back that up is, well, I'm going to create an opportunity. Well, what drives that, right? Effort and talent, right? You got the greatest talent. Do you have the effort? And if these two are working correctly, I should have an output of performance, right? Yeah. So we kind of started looking at the industry of ways to assess people in job role and position and be able to predict their ability to succeed at that role. And we were very fortunate to come across this assessment that has been used around 80 million times for top performers. Right? What makes the 1% of the 1%? Right? Does everybody wonder, why is Michael Jordan the best? Right? And so this was all founded based upon the principle of measuring the 1% of the 1% of our society. That is top performers. Well, what are their inherent traits? Right? Not their personality. Personality has nothing to do with inherent traits. How do you operate? Where's your drive come from? What is your motivation? Are you comfortable with conflict? All right, let's talk about conflict a little bit. When you hired me, did you ask me in the interview, Stan, are you comfortable with conflict?
I bet most people don't.
Would my resume say that?
No.
No. But what is our business? It's a conflict situation, and it starts on the very first call. Why? Because the consumer asked one question, how much is? And you cannot answer that question for me, can you?
Yeah, it's always a general answer.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me take a look at your vehicle. So if you would have known going in when you hired me that my comfort with conflict, I wasn't very good at. Not right or wrong or good or bad. I just wasn't comfortable with. You've been around somewhere, it's like, you know that this person is not comfortable in this conversation. Right. Well, when you start looking at indicators like that, you can start to build a profile, right, of what is the best of the best in service advisor, because it goes back to what we were talking about. We're in a commodity business, right? I can get my car fixed anywhere.
72-hour window.
72-hour window, I can get my car fixed 72, but I can go anywhere. There's nothing that you do that's any different than the guy down the street.
Especially from the customer's perspective, right? It's just
so all you got is your people. When I ask shop owners, well, what makes you special? My people, right? We have the best customer service. We focus on customer service and guest experience. So if I want 1%, I want the best of the best in my shop. And if I have that, then the output's going to be great guest experience, increased car count, ARO, right? That's all what we're looking for. And so, we started wrapping our heads around that. We started looking at that. And then we had this interesting event, right, called COVID, right? And the business changed drastically. Now, you hired me prior to COVID. And when you hired me, you were thinking of, is Stan going to be good? Face to face, right?
Yeah,
right?
All day.
And you've probably talked to shop owners, well, man, I got the greatest service advisors. You put anybody in front of them, they're great. Well, man, I'm listening to some of these phone calls and they're really struggling. So maybe I'm not asking the right questions in my interview, or maybe I'm looking for the wrong trait in somebody, right? So can I measure that? Well, the other event happened. What happened? DVI came out. Right? So
and it just keeps changing the ecosystem.
Exactly.
How that service advisor is interfacing, interacting with their customers.
And now my business has really changed from interacting face to face, that I'm relying so much of the transaction in a conversation. And that conversation is predominantly on the phone. Right? We're seeing texting come up, but most of the time people want to, hey man, tell me what's wrong with my car. I don't want to sit here and text for 10 minutes. Right?
Yeah.
And that's so DVI all of a sudden comes into the scene, and DVI is like, man, I can give transparency to somebody. Oh, this is going to be great. And I'm going to be able to make more recommendations. Well, if I increase from 6 recommendations to 10 recommendations, I'm organically going to see what? An uptick in ARO. And so all of a sudden, everybody's hot, man, this is great. And it is great. It is great. But as a result of COVID and a result of this technology, the way we're interacting about that has changed. David, that was really, really good in front of Stan at the counter going over this stuff, he was great. But when I had to shift this to the phone, man, it was a real struggle. The other piece that I missed is when you're at the shop and you're face to face, I can hear the conversation as a manager. I can hear as an operator. I can hear.
The phone removes the other half. You don't know what's going on.
And so I can see their interaction, and I go, well, I know that we're averaging 10 recommendations, but he only reviewed 2. And so, okay, well, I just lost that insight, because am I listening to that conversation? I know that I got 10 coming out of the back. How many are being approved? Well, I'm measuring that on other components out of POS, which is what's that number that where people don't approve? What's that?
Like decline services.
Decline services, right. So I'm measuring my decline services, right? And I got kind of these KPIs out here, but I'm missing one right in the middle, which is the conversation, right? So now I start looking at that. These kind of tools are out there now where let's listen to this conversation.
I would love to know the amount of shop owners that are connecting that data and being that middle piece that we're talking
I
about?
don't think there is, because it's still we're still adopting this new technology, right? We're still in the honeymoon phase with DVI. I think the top performing shops are really starting to say, I've got some new KPIs. This is allowing me to have another KPI that I've never had before, right? This tool's telling me that I'm giving out 10. So all of a sudden I got a new KPI. What is my approval rate? Well, if I want to move that approval rate, then I need to understand what's going on in the conversation. Is Johnny reviewing 10 recommendations
Or
or
is
not?
it still 4?
Or is it still
And
4?
you could adopt this technology in your shop, and it's still the same thing.
Yeah, because
Nothing's
organically you're going to
changed.
get it, right? All you did was increase the number of recommendations, so organically it went up. But in the middle,
But I think that goes right back to conflict, what you're talking about. They could be getting 10 from the technician in the back of the house, but if they're only comfortable presenting 2, and they were prior to that only doing 2, nothing's changing.
nothing's changed. And so I think what we will see is that we will get to that number just like we have on the front end that we've been measuring for a long time, lead to customer conversion rate. We haven't figured out what that is here because it's still new. But eventually, we will begin to accept a number. And as an industry, I think we have enough marketing data out there that says we've accepted 10% conversion rate. Well, I don't accept 10%. And that can't be moved by you as a partner that provides me marketing leads. That's not your problem to solve, right? So I've got to solve that problem from some type of operational process that can make sure that we're following a script, that script has been tested with the result of improving one thing and
Yeah,
one
it's
thing
identifying where that conversation's starting and how it has to end.
Yeah. And I think the first thing, I talk to people all the time, well, what do you think it should be? What's the purpose of the call? There's only one purpose of that original call. Only one. It's to book an appointment.
Get them in the shop.
That's it. There's nothing else to be measured. Did you book an appointment or not? And if you didn't book an appointment, why not? The why not is my training ground, right? So now I'm able to identify why you didn't book the appointment. So now I bring the coach in, right? Coaching you, but that 10% doesn't move. Why is that 10% not moving? So now you go back to, I have the right person in the right seat on the bus. Because your interview process was this way, you hired him because he was good with people. Now all of a sudden his environment has changed. It's a conversation. Completely different abilities when you shift from talking to someone face to face versus having that skill set on the phone.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's, this wave is coming, right? Because those two things happen. The third thing that happened, which you and I talked about, was what? Our resource pool, our labor pool, right? So we're now stuck with, I need to hire people, but I can't because the availability, or I'm paying top dollar.
Yeah.
So now,
Well, yeah, your salary pool, before it was divided by 3, and now it's maybe 1.5. Yeah.
Right. So all of these industry disruptors, right, is going on. And as an operator, I'm going, man, one, what is the right KPI? Let me identify that. Number 2, how do I measure it? But number 3, and some of that's out there. Some of that's out there. If I can figure out that you are the right fit for me by doing some type of assessment, those tools are out there. We use a tool to do that. That's one piece of the puzzle. The next piece of the puzzle is, I know that you should be doing well at this. Do I have the ability to measure your effort in doing that job? And is that effort driving the output? Two different things, and we talked about this, right? Effort does not equal output. I can be really, really good. I'm doing everything you're telling me to do, boss, but I'm still at 10%. So my effort's gotten better, but my output's still the same. So it's really about, I think, uncovering this stuff, Tony, right?
Yeah.
And kind of really looking at and bridging the gap, and I think you brought this up, we're bridging the gap between operations and marketing, right? Marketing's job is to drive opportunities to the shop. Operations and good process and training, KPIs, data, that helps us operationalize that data. So at the end of the day, the output, the objective is increase the booked appointment rate, increase the approval rate.
Yeah, and through conversations just over the years,
Sure.
I feel shop owners have a misalignment on what their expectations are. So I really enjoyed our conversation earlier of, making sure that they have the right alignment on what their goal actually should be, because it's not always this input's going to be this result. It's over here.
Right. And we talk about that all the time. People say, well, I just don't think my marketing's working. Why? Well, I'm not getting any customers. Okay, well, your objective's misaligned. What do you mean my objective's misaligned? You're doing Google AdWords to drive customers? Wrong expectation. You're doing Google AdWords
there's the whole
to drive.
middle piece they forget. Yeah.
You first got to get a phone
They
call.
just don't drive into the bay, right?
Right. And I'm sure
nice.
I'm sure you guys at Autoshop, you're talking to the shop. Yeah, but hey, you're driving. We're getting you all these phone calls. Well, at the end of the day, you're going to be judged on what? The output of that, right? But you can't answer the phone for me.
No.
I'd love for you to. Right?
I wish I could. Yeah.
Because you probably do a really good job at it, right? So again, it's really understanding what's this conversation about. What is the expectation from that conversation, which is a standard operating procedure, right? And then number two, making sure you have the right person doing the job. And then stop operating on your gut, right? We have data, tools that allow us to predict someone's success rate in that role built for this industry, right? It's not a personality has nothing to do with output. That's just whether you smile or don't smile, right?
Yeah.
If you're happy or not. I'm looking at inherent traits. What is your comfort with conflict? That is the number one indicator we look at. And so many times we see that number's not getting moved. You're not booking the appointment because there's a conflict and the person answering the phone is not comfortable and they don't know how to navigate the conversation. For example, how much is a front end alignment? Or how much is this? Well, you have told me don't give out a price on the phone. We got to look at the car. So I've got a conflict, and if I'm not comfortable with that, I'm just going to fall off the rails in the conversation, and you hear them, right? Customer calls, how much is? Here it is. Well, I can't tell you. Why can't you? Can't you just give me a ballpark? Hang up the phone. Done.
Yeah, and we were talking about this earlier too. I feel everything's so available at your fingertips too, and it's just. I was talking earlier about they're just uneducated. They don't. Maybe it's the first time their brakes have squeaked. And
the consumer, right?
Is it $3,000? Is it $9,000? They literally don't know. So my opinion is there should be a little bit more transparency and, hey, maybe it starts here, like whatever that right talking track for your shop needs to be, just to help resolve some of that initial conflict, right? So if you say, hey, it typically starts here, but here's why we need the car in, because I can tell you it's $800, but it could only be this part, then I'm getting too far into diagnosing on the call,
now,
right? So there's that. I'm sure there's that middle
there
ground.
There is, and if you could predict. The secret sauce here is my ability to predict whether your service advisor is going to do that or not. There's two things that you just brought up: comfort with conflict and analytical quotation, right? If I'm analytical, I'm going to start diagnosing. You've heard that, right? Oh my God, man, this was a 10-minute call. We just started diagnosing. And what are you doing to the consumer? You're just putting a bullet. Oh, I do not understand.
You're confusing them.
You're confusing me.
And they're like, oh my God,
so
when
we do these assessments, we look at these two KPIs. Where are you in the range of very analytical driven? If you're very analytical driven, you are the guy that's going to diagnose with that person. And then you throw in the mix of not comfortable with conflict. Now you got the recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah.
And so our approach has really shifted is let's focus on people, right? All the systems are out there. All these great tools are out there. But as a consulting group, we want to be helping you make sure that you got the right people in the right seat. And number two, that we're measuring the right thing, which is effort, regardless of what that effort is related to, whether it's a booked appointment, whether it's reviewing a DVI report, measuring that effort because the output is the same expectation. Did I increase car count in ARO? That's it. That has not changed. It's not going to change.
Yeah, I think it's real important for shop owners to take that step back and really look at that human element because that's the beginning of the conversation we're talking about, that is the shop's differentiator.
Yes.
My people are the best, right? They say it, we hear it all the time.
Yeah.
But let's make them better. And I shared a story that we had a shop owner at one point and, high call volume, not getting a lot of closed deals. So I listened to some of the phone calls and it was very apparent that he was not putting time and effort into his front counter, and we talked about this as well, is they're sales reps when it comes down to it, right? And it's just a very delicate conversation because conflict and emotions get involved. And it's scary because it's unexpected and maybe you're not financially prepared for it. And how can that person run that conversation correctly every single time?
Correct. Now, let's move that a little bit further into training, okay? So I feel good about John, right? Johnny does good, want to make him better. Well, if I don't know how he's hardwired, then it's really tough to figure out the best method or approach. Coaching's coaching. The difference between a great coach and other coaches is their ability, their approach with the material. The material is the same, guys. There's nothing. The sauce is the sauce, right? So I've got a service advisor here, and I've got a coach here. Coach has got all the great methodologies. So here's a good script. This is how you do it. He starts working with John, and it's just not moving. Well, why? Well, if I know his inherent traits, and I could say because he's an enterprise thinker, he doesn't need to be micromanaged. And you only need to give him bullets, right? But you as a coach are very analytical, and you think you get to give him all of this material, right? You're going to get what? Pushback. So his learning style, keywords learning style, how do you need to coach him?
How do you
not what material you're coaching. Yeah. The material is the material. But when we're able to align the coach or help the coach understand this is the approach. How do I know that? I've done an assessment on them. Not his personality, his inherent traits, right? His comfort with conflict, his enterprise thinking, his communication style, how he interprets things. I can tell you that. If I give that information back to the coach, what's happening?
The light bulb moment.
The light bulb, because now I'm going to listen to you because you're speaking my language, right? And so that's just a continuation. We're helping assessing people from a high-end perspective. We're measuring their effort and their output, whatever that is, right? And they need help in coaching. We're going to give the coach the tools to help them present the material in a manner that that person's going to be able to take in.
What would you say would be your top 3 recommendations for the shop owners listening in today to look at that in their business?
Absolutely assess your people. Validate your hunch.
And we talked about you have the bus.
Yeah.
Is that person in the right seat or the wrong seat?
Right. And if you're like everybody else, the labor pool's going through what it's going, so you're shifting people in your organization. Now, this is a big one. We're talking to owners and go, well, you know what? Mark was in the back. I need some help up front, and I like him, and he's really good, and he's good with customers. I think I'm going to move him up front. We just changed job roles, right? We went from back in the bag to conversations and different skill sets, right? So if you're trying to figure out where people go, or you're struggling with that conversion rate numbers not moving, the first step, understand your people. Get away from the gut feeling of what you think about someone and use a scientific approach that says, I can tell you with very, very good accuracy whether he's fit for that role. Better yet, I can tell you how he in this role will operate with the people in the back. Because when you move to the front, you have communication needs from the back. And we talked about that one too. If I have a technician that is very analytical, I think I said this, he's taken 100 pictures, right? And I got a really, really big enterprise thinker over here. There's going to be conflict here. Man, why are you giving me 100 pictures, right? And now you got these culture issues going on. So if you're experiencing these types of things in the shop, Tony, I always say, let's assess people first. Then we can get a visual of what's going on with your people. Then you start applying that to all of these other strategies, your marketing, your process, your investments, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to improve your return on investment with the marketing spend, and you want to increase your ARO with DVI. In between all of that is guest experience and your people. So does that answer that question?
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, good.
In closing, can you just kind of wrap to how, if someone is interested in chatting more with you, how they can reach out to you?
Sure. Iron Fist Consultants. You can go to ironfistconsultants.com. Reach out us that way. Stan Stokes. More than happy to have a conversation with folks about what's going on and go from there. Sure. Or maybe y'all's website, I think.
Yeah, we can share some
links on that. Yeah.
Stan, great conversations.
Yeah.
So great to have you in. Thanks again for tuning in to the 10 Mil with Tony Mercury. If you like this content, check out our YouTube channel. A lot more great conversations covering all automotive topics. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.